I am Marcus, 32 years old, and I used to believe family meant unconditional love. That changed last Christmas when my own mother told me to eat dinner in my car while everyone else gathered around the table. My brother Kyle smirked, saying, "Why would we waste a seat on you?" As I stood there holding my plate, a wrapped gift tucked under my arm. That gift was about to change everything. Before I tell you how I turned this humiliation into the most satisfying moment of my life, drop a comment saying where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family. Growing up in suburban Michigan, our family seemed normal from the outside. My parents, Thomas and Diana Anderson, had 2 sons. Kyle was the firstborn, 2 years older than me, and from day one, he was the golden child. He had the athletic build, the natural charisma, and the kind of confidence that made him popular with everyone. I was different. Quieter, more thoughtful, and academically inclined. While Kyle brought home sports trophies, I brought home academic awards. The difference was that Kyle's achievements were celebrated with parties and praise, while mine were acknowledged with brief nods and quick changes of subject. "Your brother is just more outgoing," my mother would explain whenever I questioned the disparity. "Not everyone can shine in the same way." But it wasn't just about the recognition. It was about the double standards that defined our childhood. When Kyle broke our neighbor's window playing baseball, it was brushed off as boys being boys. When I accidentally knocked over my mom's favorite vase while vacuuming, I was grounded for 2 weeks for being careless. This pattern continued throughout our childhood, creating an invisible hierarchy in our home that positioned Kyle at the top and me somewhere near the bottom. The bullying started subtly. Kyle would take credit for my ideas during family discussions. He would borrow my belongings without asking and return them damaged, if at all. In high school, he turned my few friends against me by spreading rumors that I had said things about them that I never did. When I confronted him, he would play innocent. And somehow I would end up being the one apologizing. "Marcus is just jealous," my parents would say to relatives when tensions rose between us. "He has always been the sensitive one." My cousin Rachel was the only other family member who received treatment similar to mine, though for different reasons. She had a rebellious streak that my conservative family disapproved of. But even she had moments of redemption in their eyes. When we were 16, Rachel stole my savings bonds that my grandfather had given me for college. $500 disappeared from my desk drawer, and later I discovered Rachel had used the money to buy concert tickets for herself and friends. When I brought this up to my parents, expecting justice, I instead received a lecture about forgiveness and family loyalty. "She made a mistake, Marcus. We all do. She promised not to do it again, and that should be enough for you," my father said, his tone suggesting the matter was closed. Rachel never returned the money or properly apologized, yet she was welcomed at every family gathering with open arms. Meanwhile, I was constantly reminded to be on my best behavior, as if I were the one with the history of transgression. Despite the continuous undermining at home, I focused on building my future. I worked hard in school, earned a scholarship to study computer science, and eventually landed a job as a software engineer at a respected tech company in Detroit. My financial independence gave me some breathing room from my family's dynamics, but it didn't heal the emotional wounds that had accumulated over decades. My success seemed to aggravate the situation further. Kyle, who had struggled to hold down jobs after a mediocre college career, would make snide comments about me being just a computer nerd, or question whether my job was really that important. My parents never corrected him. Instead, they would change the subject or, worse, join in with comments like, "Well, not everyone can have a normal job with regular hours." As we moved into our 30s, the pattern of exclusion became more blatant. Family gatherings would be planned without consulting my schedule. I would learn about weekend trips from social media posts after they happened. When I was invited to events, it often felt like an afterthought. "Oh, we assumed you would be busy with work. my mother would say when I questioned why I wasn't included in the original plans. Still, I persisted in trying to maintain a relationship with my family. I showed up to birthdays with thoughtful gifts. I offered help when anyone needed tech support or financial advice. I swallowed my pride and attended family functions where I knew I would be treated as an accessory rather than a valued member. Last December, I received a text invitation to Christmas dinner. It was a group message to the extended family, and my name was included almost as an obligation. I hesitated, recalling the previous year when I had sat through 4 hours of conversation that excluded me. But something in me still hoped for acceptance, still believed that family could change. So I decided to go, and I decided to bring something special. Through my job, I had connections that allowed me to acquire a rare vintage stock certificate from a now famous technology company. It was worth over $50,000 and would be the crown jewel of my father's collection of financial memorabilia. I thought perhaps this gift would finally earn me the respect and appreciation I had sought for so long. It was a desperate move, I see that now. But at the time it felt like my last best hope to be truly seen by my family. Little did I know that this Christmas dinner would become a turning point in my life, though not in the way I had hoped. The week before Christmas, I meticulously prepared gifts for everyone. For my mother, a vintage brooch that matched her favorite earrings. For Kyle and his wife Stephanie, tickets to a concert they had mentioned wanting to attend. For Rachel, a first edition of her favorite childhood book. And for my father, the piece de resistance, that rare vintage stock certificate. Beautifully framed and authenticated, worth more than my car. I spent hours wrapping each gift with precision, writing personalized cards, and imagining the reactions they might elicit. Perhaps this would be the year things changed. Perhaps the perfect gift would bridge the gap that seemed unbridgeable. Christmas Eve brought a heavy snowfall to Michigan. I woke early on Christmas Day to ensure I had time to navigate the slippery roads to my parents' suburban home. As I drove, I rehearsed casual conversations in my head, determined to keep things light and pleasant. No mention of past hurts, no bringing up old wounds. Just a normal family Christmas. That was all I wanted. I pulled into the driveway at exactly 2 o'clock, the time specified in the invitation. Several cars were already parked along the street, indicating that most of the family had arrived early. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the gifts from my trunk and made my way to the front door, careful not to slip on the partially shoveled walkway. The door swung open before I could knock. My mother stood there, already looking past me toward another car pulling up. "Oh, Marcus, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting surprise rather than pleasure. "Put your boots on the rack. We just had the carpets cleaned." I stepped inside to the sound of laughter and conversation coming from the living room. The house was transformed, as it always was at Christmas. A 12-foot tree dominated the corner of the living room, adorned with ornaments collected over decades. Garlands draped the staircase, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. It was beautiful, nostalgic, and immediately I felt that familiar mix of longing and discomfort. In the living room, Kyle and Stephanie were at the center of a group. Kyle telling some animated story that had everyone captivated. My Aunt Jean and Uncle Robert nodded along enthusiastically. Rachel and her husband Daniel sat nearby, Rachel's head thrown back in laughter at whatever Kyle was saying. Cousins, second cousins, and family friends filled the remaining space, creating a tableau of holiday togetherness that I observed from the periphery. "Marcus," Kyle acknowledged when he spotted me. "Thought you might bail this year." "Merry Christmas to you too, Kyle," I responded, attempting to keep my tone light. I moved through the room, offering brief greetings and placing my gifts under the tree alongside dozens of others. I noticed immediately that the gifts I had brought the previous year, carefully selected for each recipient, were nowhere to be seen in the house, unlike the gifts others had given, which were prominently displayed on shelves and mantels. My father emerged from his study, nodding at me before turning his attention to Uncle Robert. "Rob," "Come see the new addition to my collection," he said, completely bypassing any greeting to his younger son. Seeking something to do, I made my way to the kitchen to offer help. My mother was busy coordinating the final preparations for dinner, assisted by Aunt Jean and a couple of cousins. "Need any help?" I asked, rolling up my sleeves. My mother barely glanced up. "No. We have it under control. Why don't you go join the men in the living room?" I returned to the living room, where I stood awkwardly at the edge of conversations, occasionally attempting to join in only to have the topic shift or be talked over. I overheard Kyle mentioning to Daniel that Marcus probably won't stay long anyway. He always has some excuse to leave early. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, but pushed it down. It was Christmas. I would make the best of it. As dinner preparation continued, I noticed my mother directing family members to check the dining room seating arrangement. Curious, I wandered in to see a beautifully set table. The good china was out. Crystal glasses at each place setting, name cards positioned precisely. I scanned the table, looking for my name. It wasn't there. Every seat had a name card. Kyle and Stephanie. Rachel and Daniel. All my aunts and uncles. Even cousins I barely saw once a year. But nothing for Marcus. I told myself there must be some mistake. Perhaps my mother had forgotten to put out my name card. Perhaps I would be seated at a smaller table with the younger cousins, though I was 32 and the kids' table hadn't been used in years. I rejoined the group in the living room, where the conversation had turned to Kyle's recent promotion. "It's a big responsibility," he was saying, "but the company recognizes leadership potential. Your brother has always been a natural leader," my father said proudly, as if I weren't standing right there. The minutes ticked by, filled with similar conversations that either excluded me or referenced me only to highlight Kyle's superior qualities. When gifts were mentioned, I noticed my carefully wrapped packages had been moved to the back of the pile under the tree, barely visible behind larger, more elaborately decorated presents. By the time my mother announced dinner was ready, the knot in my stomach had grown into a ball of anxiety and anticipation. Maybe the dinner would be better. Maybe around the table, with food as a buffer, I could find my place in this family gathering. How wrong I was. "Dinner is served," my mother announced, and everyone began moving toward the dining room. I followed, still hoping to find my place at the table, still believing there had been some oversight that would be corrected. The family filed in, each person finding their designated seat with appreciative comments about the beautiful table setting. My father took his place at the head of the table, with my mother at the opposite end. Kyle and Stephanie sat at my father's right hand, positions of honor in our family's unspoken hierarchy. I stood by the entrance, waiting for someone to realize I didn't have a seat, expecting someone to make room or find an extra chair. The conversation flowed around me as everyone settled in, complimenting the decorations and the aroma of the food being brought in from the kitchen. As the last person sat down, my mother looked up and seemed to notice me for the first time since dinner was announced. "Oh, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet table. "There's not really room. You can eat in the car." The statement hung in the air. Several relatives glanced up briefly before returning their attention to their plates or their neighbors, suddenly fascinated by the cranberry sauce or the pattern on the napkins. Then Kyle spoke, his voice carrying that familiar tone of mockery thinly veiled as humor. "Why would we waste a seat on you?" His wife Stephanie gave him a small nudge, but she was smiling too, as if this were just a harmless joke between brothers. But I saw the truth in Kyle's eyes. This wasn't a joke. This was the culmination of a lifetime of pushing me to the margins of the family. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. A fault line that had been developing for 32 years finally split open. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each family member, searching for any sign of discomfort. any indication that someone found this treatment unacceptable. My Aunt Jean looked away quickly. Uncle Robert suddenly needed to adjust his tie. Cousins became absorbed in straightening their silverware. And there was Rachel, comfortably seated between her husband and my cousin Michael, a full place setting before her. Name card perfectly positioned. Rachel, who had stolen from me. Rachel, who had never made amends. She at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. But not uncomfortable enough to offer her seat or to speak up. My father cleared his throat. Marcus, don't make a scene. We can set up a TV tray in the living room if that's better. Better than eating in my car? The suggestion only highlighted the absurdity of the situation. This wasn't about lack of space. The table could easily accommodate one more chair. This was about something much deeper, something that had been communicated to me in 1,000 small ways throughout my life. You don't belong here. You are not one of us. You are tolerated. Not welcomed. Memories flashed through my mind. Kyle, accidentally, deleting my college application essay the night before it was due. My parents missing my college graduation because Kyle had a minor league baseball game the same weekend. The family vacation photos where I was positioned at the edge. Easily cropped out for the versions that were framed and displayed. I had forgiven so much. I had made excuses for them, blamed myself, tried harder to fit in. And here I stood. Literally without a seat at the table, being told to eat Christmas dinner in my car like an unwelcome delivery driver. Kyle was still smirking, clearly enjoying my humiliation. He leaned over to whisper something to Stephanie, who suppressed a giggle. The family began passing dishes. The awkwardness of the moment already being papered over with discussions about the quality of the turkey and compliments to my mother on her famous stuffing. They were moving on, expecting me to either slink away to my car or take the TV tray option and be grateful for it. They expected me to accept this treatment, as I always had. Not this time. I stood motionless for several seconds, allowing the reality of the situation to fully sink in. The family continued serving food. The clinking of silverware and murmur of conversation creating a surreal soundtrack to my moment of clarity. Without a word, I turned and walked back to the living room. Toward the Christmas tree where my carefully wrapped gifts lay partially hidden behind others. I knelt down and retrieved them one by one. My movements deliberate and calm despite the storm raging inside me. The vintage stock certificate from my father was in a slender box wrapped in silver paper. I held it in my hands for a moment, thinking about what it represented. Not just its monetary value, which was substantial, but what it had meant to me. I had thought this rare find might finally earn me a place of respect in my father's eyes. Now I saw how pathetic that hope had been. This certificate, worth over $50,000, would go to a man who couldn't be bothered to make space for his son at the Christmas table. To a man who had consistently chosen to overlook cruelty rather than address it. The realization was both painful and liberating. With the gifts in hand, I walked back to the dining room. The conversation dimmed as I entered, curious eyes following my movement. I approached the table slowly, my face betraying none of the emotion I felt. "I think I'll pass on dinner," I said, my voice steady and clear. I stepped behind Kyle's chair, leaning in slightly. "Check under your plate," I said quietly, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. While everyone's attention was on my face, I slipped an envelope under Kyle's plate. The movement so smooth that no one seemed to notice. The envelope was empty, but they wouldn't know that until later. "Merry Christmas," I added, straightening up and looking around the table one last time. My mother's expression shifted from irritation to confusion. "Marcus, don't be dramatic. We can make space." Too late. The offer rang hollow, motivated not by a genuine desire to include me but by the sudden realization that I wasn't going to accept the role they had assigned me. "No need," I replied. "I know where I stand now. Enjoy your dinner." I collected my coat from the hall closet, the box containing the stock certificate tucked securely under my arm. I could hear murmured conversations from the dining room, my name mentioned in confused and slightly annoyed tones. As I opened the front door, I heard my father call out, "Marcus! Come back and sit down. Your mother went to a lot of trouble for this dinner." Without turning, I replied, "I'm sure it's delicious. Maybe save me a plate for next year. I might have a seat by then." I walked to my car, the snow crunching under my boots. The cold air felt clarifying, as if it were washing away years of denial and false hope. I got into my car, placing the gifts on the passenger seat. Through the dining room window, I could see the family returning to their meal, heads bent together in what I imagined was a discussion about my overreaction. I sat there for a few minutes, watching the warm scene framed by the window. From outside, it looked perfect. The beautiful table, the family gathered together. The holiday decorations creating a picture worthy of a Christmas card. No one would guess that just moments ago, a son had been told to eat in his car while the rest of the family dined together. After about 10 minutes, I saw Kyle reach under his plate, his expression changing from confusion to alarm as he opened the empty envelope. He stood up abruptly, saying something to the table that caused several heads to turn toward the window where I sat watching. My phone began to ring. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw my father rush out the front door in his shirt sleeves, no coat despite the cold. He was too late. I was already moving, both literally and figuratively, away from the family that had never made room for me. My phone continued to ring as I drove through the snowy streets. I turned it off after the 5th call, needing space to process what had just happened and what would come next. The stock certificate sat beside me, a tangible reminder of my worth that my family had never recognized. For the first time in my life, I felt no urge to turn around, to apologize, to make things easier for everyone else at my own expense. Instead, I felt something new and unfamiliar, the lightness of setting down a burden I had carried for too long. I drove without a clear destination, eventually checking into a hotel rather than returning to my apartment. I needed neutral territory, a place where no memories lurked. No family photos sat on shelves. The hotel room was impersonal and clean, offering exactly the emotional buffer I needed. When I finally turned my phone back on several hours later, it nearly exploded with notifications. 15 missed calls from my mother. 7 from my father. 3 from Kyle, along with a series of increasingly hostile text messages. "What the hell was that about? You better get back here now. You've really done it this time." There were also voicemails, which I played on speaker as I sat on the edge of the hotel bed. "Marcus, this is your mother. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to come back right now. Your behavior was completely inappropriate." My father's message was next. "Son, whatever issue you're having, this isn't the way to handle it. Your mother is upset, and you've ruined Christmas dinner. Call me back immediately." Kyle's voicemail was predictably aggressive. "You think you're being funny? Dad told me about that certificate. You better not have taken it with you. I swear if you don't bring it back." I deleted the rest without listening. The stock certificate lay on the desk where I had placed it after checking in. In the soft hotel lighting, its ornate border and vintage printing looked even more impressive. This piece of paper, representing shares in what would become one of the world's most valuable technology companies, was both a financial asset and a historical artifact. My father, with his passion for financial history, would have treasured it above almost anything else I could have given him. But the gift wasn't just the certificate. The gift was me, seeking approval, seeking a place in the family. And that had been rejected long before today's dinner. More messages came in as the evening progressed. My mother's tone shifted from angry to manipulative. "Marcus, I don't know why you're trying to hurt us like this. After everything we've done for you. Everything they'd done for me." I laughed bitterly at that. What had they done except consistently communicate that I was less valuable, less important, less worthy of love and attention than my brother. Surprisingly, there was a text from Rachel. That was really messed up what they did. Are you okay? It was the first expression of concern from any family member, and it came from the person I might have least expected it from. I didn't respond immediately, unsure if it was sincere or if she was fishing for information to report back to the others. Around 9 o'clock, the hotel room phone rang. I answered cautiously. Mr. Anderson? There's a Kyle Anderson in the lobby asking for you. He's quite insistent. Should we send him up? So Kyle had tracked me down. Probably by calling the hotels in the area until he found where I was registered. I wasn't ready to face him, not tonight, not when the wound was still so fresh. No, I replied. I don't wish to see him. Please ask him to leave. Very well, sir. I hung up and immediately received another text from Kyle. They won't let me up. Real mature, Marcus. You can't hide forever. But I wasn't hiding. For the first time, I was standing my ground. The next morning, Christmas was officially over, but the fallout was just beginning. I checked out of the hotel and returned to my apartment, half expecting to find Kyle waiting there. Thankfully, the hallway was empty. Inside, I made coffee and sat down to compose an email to my parents. I needed to communicate my feelings clearly, without the interruptions and manipulations that would inevitably occur in a face-to-face conversation or phone call. Mom and Dad, I wrote, yesterday made it clear where I stand in this family. Being told to eat Christmas dinner in my car while everyone else had a place at the table was not a space issue. It was a manifestation of how I've been treated my entire life. I'm taking some time away to reconsider our relationship. Please respect my need for space. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then turned my phone to silent and placed it in a drawer. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what came next. Later that day, a more formal email arrived from my father, addressing the stock certificate directly. Marcus, that certificate is extremely valuable, as I'm sure you know. I expect you to return it immediately. Your behavior yesterday was childish and embarrassing. We raised you better than that. They hadn't raised me at all, I realized. They had tolerated my presence while focusing their real parenting energy on Kyle. I didn't respond to the email. Over the next few days, the communication strategy shifted. Extended family members began reaching out, clearly enlisted by my parents to act as intermediaries. Your mother is very hurt, Aunt Jean texted. Whatever the issue is, surely it can be resolved. Uncle Robert called, leaving a voicemail that attempted to minimize what had happened. These family misunderstandings can get blown out of proportion. Why don't you come over for coffee and we can talk about it? My cousin Michael, who had always been cordial but never particularly close, sent a surprisingly supportive message. That dinner scene was harsh, man. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd flipped the table. Take the time you need. Most surprising was a second message from Rachel, longer and more thoughtful than her first. I know we have our own complicated history. But what happened at dinner wasn't right. No one should be treated that way, especially by family. I'm sorry I didn't say anything in the moment. A week passed. I returned to work after the holiday break, immersing myself in coding projects that required my full concentration. The stock certificate remained in my apartment, its fate undecided. Part of me wanted to return it, to be free of any connection it created. Another part, the part that had endured decades of being treated as less than, wanted to keep it as a small compensation for years of emotional neglect. Kyle eventually showed up at my office, creating a scene in the lobby that required security to intervene. His face was red with fury as they escorted him out, his voice carrying through the glass doors. This isn't over, Marcus! You can't just walk away from family. But that was exactly what I was doing, at least for now. Walking away from a family that had never really made space for me in the first place. January arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a new sense of clarity. After 2 weeks of minimal contact with my family, I decided it was time to address the situation directly. Not out of a desire to return to the status quo, but to establish new terms for any future relationship we might have. I texted Kyle first, knowing he would be the most difficult conversation. "We need to talk. Coffee shop on Main Street, tomorrow at 10. Just you." His response was immediate. "About time you stopped hiding. I'll be there." The next morning, I arrived early. Selecting a table in the corner that offered some privacy without being completely isolated. Kyle arrived 10 minutes late, a power move he had employed since childhood. "So," he said, sliding into the seat across from me without removing his coat. "Where is it?" No greeting, no acknowledgement of the situation. Just a demand for the certificate. "Hello to you too, Kyle," I replied calmly. "I didn't come here to talk about the certificate." "Then what's the point of this meeting?" His impatience was palpable, his body language suggesting he might leave at any moment. "The point is to tell you directly that things need to change if we're going to have any relationship moving forward." Kyle laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Is this about the dinner seating? You're really overreacting, you know that? It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't just about Christmas dinner," I said, maintaining my composure. "It was about a lifetime of being treated as less important, less valuable. Of being bullied by you and having our parents look the other way." "Bullied?" Kyle's expression shifted to one of mock offense. "We were kids, Marcus. Brothers mess with each other. That's normal. What happened between us went far beyond normal sibling rivalry. And you know it. You deliberately undermined me at every opportunity. You turned our parents against me. You made sure I knew my place was always beneath yours." Kyle's facade of casual indifference cracked slightly. "That's not true. You were always the smart one, the one with the fancy degree and the high-paying job. What did I have? You had our parents' unconditional love and support. You had the benefit of the doubt in every situation. You had a place at the table." The literal and metaphorical truth of that statement hung between us. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Look," he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory, "maybe things got out of hand sometimes. But we're family. You can't just walk away because your feelings got hurt." "I'm not walking away," I clarified. "I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference." I outlined what those boundaries would look like. No more accepting disrespect. No more allowing myself to be excluded or marginalized. No more pretending that hurtful behavior was acceptable because it came from family. Kyle listened with growing impatience. When I finished, he leaned forward. "And the certificate? Is holding it hostage part of your new boundaries?" "I'm not holding it hostage. I'm deciding what to do with a gift that was mine to give or not give. Dad really wants it, you know. It would mean a lot to him." For the first time, I saw something resembling genuine emotion in Kyle's eyes. Not manipulation, not anger, but a simple acknowledgement of our father's desire for the certificate. "I'll think about it," I said. "But not because of any pressure from you or anyone else. Because it's my choice to make." We parted without resolution, but I felt a shift in the dynamic between us. I had spoken my truth without anger or apology, and Kyle had, however briefly, engaged with me as an equal rather than as the little brother he could dismiss or dominate. The conversation with my parents came next, at their insistence. They suggested dinner at their house, which I declined, proposing a neutral coffee shop instead. My mother objected. "We can't discuss family matters in public." But eventually they agreed. When we met, the contrast between this meeting and countless family gatherings was stark. Here, in this neutral space, they couldn't rely on the familiar dynamics of their home. They couldn't leave the room when the conversation became uncomfortable, or use household tasks as excuses to avoid direct communication. "We don't understand why you're doing this," my mother began. "Family should come first, always." "I agree," I replied. But what happened at Christmas made it clear that I'm not considered full family. I'm an afterthought, an obligation. That's not true. My father interjected. You're our son. Being your son by blood hasn't earned me the same treatment Kyle receives. It hasn't even earned me a seat at the Christmas table. My mother flushed. That was a misunderstanding about space. Was it? There were 16 place settings for 16 people, and I was the only one told to eat in my car. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a message. For the first time, I laid out the pattern of favoritism and exclusion that had defined my life in their home. I described specific incidents, not with anger but with clarity, refusing to let them minimize or deny what had happened. We never meant to make you feel that way, my mother said, tears forming in her eyes. Intent doesn't erase impact, I replied. And it's taken me 32 years to realize that I deserve better, even from my parents. Especially from my parents. The conversation was difficult, with moments of defensiveness and attempts to shift blame. But there were also glimpses of recognition, brief acknowledgments that perhaps they had failed to see what was happening. Failed to protect me, failed to provide the emotional support I needed. What do you want from us now? My father finally asked. I want acknowledgement of the past. I want commitment to change in the future. And I want the space to decide for myself what kind of relationship we can rebuild, if any. They didn't like it. The terms felt foreign to them, accustomed as they were to dictating the terms of family relationships. But they also sensed, perhaps for the first time, that the alternative might be losing me completely. As the weeks passed, other family members reached out. Some, like Aunt Jean, were clearly trying to pressure me back into the old patterns. Others, like my cousin Michael, expressed genuine support for my stand. Most surprising was Rachel, who invited me to meet for lunch. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, she said across the table at a small bistro downtown. Not just at Christmas, but before that too, when I took your savings bonds. It was the first time she had directly acknowledged the theft in the 16 years since it happened. I was in a bad place then, she continued. But that's no excuse. I should have paid you back. I should have apologized properly. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. It's not just the $500. It's the interest it would have earned over all these years. I was momentarily speechless. Of all the responses I had expected from my family, this act of genuine accountability was perhaps the least expected. Thank you, I said, taking the envelope. Not just for this, but for acknowledging what happened. I should have said something at Christmas, she added, when they told you to eat in your car. It was wrong, and I just sat there. Most people did. That doesn't make it right. In that moment, I felt a connection with Rachel that had never existed before, built on honesty rather than the forced closeness of family obligation. As for the stock certificate, I made my decision in February. I donated it to a nonprofit organization that provided educational opportunities for underprivileged youth, establishing a scholarship in my grandfather's name. He had been the one family member who had always seen me clearly, who had valued my qualities rather than comparing me to Kyle. It felt right that his legacy should continue in this way. I informed my family of the donation by email, including the acknowledgement letter from the organization. There was initial anger from my father and predictable rage from Kyle. But there was also, from a few family members, grudging respect for the choice. Slowly, tentatively, new patterns began to emerge. My mother called occasionally, her conversations more careful, more attuned to my responses. My father sent an article about software engineering, a small gesture but one that acknowledged my professional identity in a way he never had before. Kyle remained Kyle, but with slightly blunted edges. He knew now that his usual tactics would no longer work, that I would walk away rather than accept mistreatment. It was a significant shift in our lifelong power dynamic. As spring approached, I received an invitation to Easter dinner. At the bottom, in my mother's handwriting. "There will be a place for you at the table. Always." It wasn't everything. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the past or a guarantee for the future. But it was a start, a small opening that might, with time and continued effort on all sides, lead to something healthier. I accepted the invitation, but on my terms. I would come for dessert only, maintaining some distance while still opening the door to reconciliation. It was a boundary that respected my needs while allowing for the possibility of change. The process was far from perfect. There were setbacks and old patterns that tried to reassert themselves. But for the first time in my life, I was an active participant in defining my family relationships rather than a passive recipient of whatever treatment was handed to me. 6 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, my life looked remarkably different. The changes weren't dramatic or sudden, but they were profound and meaningful. My relationship with my family had evolved into something I could never have imagined before. We were not close in the conventional sense, but we had established a new kind of connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I visited occasionally on my terms, staying for limited periods that protected my emotional well-being. When old patterns emerged, as they sometimes did, I addressed them directly or simply removed myself from the situation. My mother had made the most significant effort to change. After several painful conversations, she had begun to acknowledge her role in enabling the family dynamics that had hurt me for so long. "I didn't see it," she admitted during one particularly honest discussion. "Or maybe I didn't want to see it. It was easier to go along with the way things were than to address the problems." That admission, simple as it was, helped heal wounds I had carried for decades. My father was slower to change, his pride making it difficult for him to acknowledge any failings as a parent. But there were small signs of effort. He asked questions about my work, showing genuine interest in my career for the first time. He sent occasional texts checking in. Awkward but sincere attempts to build a relationship that had never really existed before. Kyle remained the most resistant to the new reality. Our interactions were limited and often tense. But even he seemed to understand that the old hierarchy had been permanently disrupted. His attempts at manipulation no longer worked, his barbs no longer landed with the same impact. Without the power to hurt me, he sometimes seemed at a loss for how to relate to me at all. The most unexpected development was my strengthened relationship with Rachel. Our shared experience as the family, outsiders, created a bond that grew into genuine friendship. We met regularly for coffee, sharing stories and supporting each other through the ongoing process of redefining our places in the family. "You know," she said during one of these meetings, "what you did at Christmas was kind of incredible. Terrifying, but incredible. You changed everything." "Not everything," I replied, "but enough to make a difference. Beyond my blood relatives." I had consciously worked to build what I now thought of as my chosen family. Friends who valued me for exactly who I was. Colleagues who respected my contributions. A community of people who made space for me without question or condition. Professional therapy had been an essential part of my healing journey. Weekly sessions helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships and develop healthier patterns for the future. I learned to recognize and challenge the negative self-perceptions that had been instilled in me since childhood. I discovered that standing up for myself wasn't selfish or dramatic, as my family had often suggested, but an essential act of self-preservation. The interesting thing about boundaries, my therapist noted, is that they don't just protect you from others. They also define who you are. By deciding what you will and won't accept, you're declaring your own worth. That perspective shifted something fundamental in my understanding of the Christmas dinner incident. What had felt like a breaking point was actually a breakthrough. A necessary disruption of patterns that had been harmful for far too long. As summer arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I visited the educational foundation where I had donated the stock certificate. The scholarship in his name had already helped 3 students begin their college journeys. Young people who might otherwise have lacked the financial resources to pursue higher education. Standing in the foundation's modest office, looking at the plaque bearing my grandfather's name, I felt a sense of rightness that no family approval could have provided. This was a legacy that aligned with my values, a way of honoring the one family member who had truly seen and appreciated me. When my birthday came in August, I received cards from several family members, including a surprisingly thoughtful note from my father. "I'm proud of the man you've become," he wrote. Words I had waited a lifetime to hear. Whether he truly meant them or was simply making an effort, the gesture itself represented progress. I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, inviting friends and the few family members with whom I had built healthier relationships. Rachel came, bringing her husband who, freed from the family dynamics, turned out to be warm and engaging. My cousin Michael attended with his girlfriend. My mother came for a short time, visibly working to adapt to this new context where she wasn't in control of the environment or the conversation. Kyle didn't come, sending a generic text message instead. That was fine. Our relationship, if it was to heal at all, would take more time and more effort on his part. The contrast between this celebration and countless family gatherings of the past was striking. Here, I wasn't relegated to the periphery or expected to make myself small. Here, in this space I had created, surrounded by people who genuinely valued me, I could simply be myself. Looking back on the Christmas dinner that had changed everything, I no longer felt the sharp pain that had initially accompanied the memory. Instead, I felt grateful for the clarity it had provided, for the catalyst it had become in transforming my life. The lesson wasn't that family doesn't matter. It was that true family, whether related by blood or by choice, is defined by love, respect, and making space for each person at the table. Both literally and figuratively. It was learning that sometimes walking away is necessary not just for personal healing but to create the possibility for something better to emerge. I had spent 32 years trying to earn a place in a family system that was designed to keep me on the outside. Now, at 33, I had stopped trying to fit into spaces that were deliberately made too small for me. Instead, I was building my own table. One with room for everyone who was willing to treat others with dignity and respect. The stock certificate that had once represented my desperate bid for acceptance now funded opportunities for young people to build their futures. The pain of exclusion had transformed into the strength to create inclusion. The family dynamics that had once seemed immutable had been permanently altered by one simple act of self-respect. Standing up for yourself isn't always dramatic or defiant. Sometimes it's as quiet as walking away from a table where you're not welcome. Sometimes it's as simple as deciding that you deserve better, even from the people who are supposed to love you most. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members? What was the moment that made you realize something needed to change? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening, and remember, you always deserve a seat at the table.